Hey everyone, this is Greg Washington, and welcome to the next episode of Guards Down. I have with me today a very special guest. He is a rocket scientist, a really good friend of mine, one of the people that I look up to the most, Howard Conyers. Howard, how's it going?
Man, how you doing, Greg? Man, it's a pleasure to be here.
Man, look, tell us about yourself. I mean, I can't do it any due justice, to the credentials and the accolades that you've had, growing up and the name that you made for yourself. So tell us who you are.
Man, Greg, man, you're a vet. You went to West Point, man. I can't hold a candle to what you accomplish in life, my brother. I'm just trying to. Everybody can't go to West Point, you know. But but a little bit about myself. I'm originally from a little small town off I-95 called Manning, not too far from Fayetteville, about 2.5 hours. Went to North Carolina A&T, studied engineering. Then I went to Duke University and got my master's and PhD in engineering. And then I worked for NASA in the aerospace industry, living in New Orleans with my wife. And what people, I guess the joke is, I'm a rocket scientist who also is a pit master. So pretty much a farm kid who grew up cooking barbecue all his life, and going through these channels to just talk about the legacy of what Black people have contributed to American barbecue culture. It's often overlooked. And so I spend a lot of time focusing my work on that effort outside of engineering. So that's just a little bit about myself.
Got you. Well, of course, a fellow Carolinian, so, that definitely goes in my books. And then, coming from A&T, shoot, man, just before we get into, the topic, I've always had the question around, should a Black person attend an Ivy League school versus an HBCU, right? So if I knew I was going to be great, would I be better off helping an HBCU come up in the ranks, when it comes to college rankings versus, going to an Ivy League school? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think I got two thoughts on that. I think for the undergraduate experience, I believe African Americans should go to HBCU. There's nothing like the experience of going to HBCU. And the reason I think it's deeper than the education. It also allows you to see that Black culture is not a monolith. You get to see so many nuances in Black culture, whether it's people from the South or from Atlanta, from DC or Chicago. They all have their nuances and so Black culture is very unique and special in that regards. And you just see like Black people just trying to strive for excellence. But since I went to Duke University for my graduate school, like I believe there's immense value in going to get your graduate training from an Ivy League type institution. The connections, that's the world. The world unfortunately respects Ivy League institutions or PWIs in higher regard. So I think there's value in that. I think there's a lot of value. So when I have kids, like I want them to go to HBCU undergrad, but I definitely want them to go to like a Ivy League school for their graduate training, whatever that may be in.
Got you. No, and I appreciate that insight, and I feel the same way. The undergrad, of course, it's one of those things where you're finding yourself, you're realizing what, you're hungry about, as well as you're getting to learn, yourself. And this is your first time being an adult and having to be responsible. And I got a lot of friends that went to HBCUs, and their experience was, this was the first time in my life where I was the majority, and it felt great. And so, I just wanted to ask that question, before we got into, this overall topic. So I appreciate, you shining some light on that.
Okay, no, that's an easy question, man. I just think that's a very needed conversation, though. Always. But if you get the opportunity to go to a service academy, you can't not take that opportunity. That's just a very unique bond and family you're going into as well. So, but I think that's my preference on just HBCUs and when you should attend.
Yeah. So you spoke on Black culture And so what I want to get into, of course, you know, our podcast is all about how different cultures view, treat, and overcome trauma and grief. And just to kind of just dive into it, you know, my biggest and my first question that I like to ask all my guests is, you know, did your parents or the people around you growing up teach you how to deal with grief and trauma?
I mean, as far as grief, they taught us how to deal with grief from the standpoint, like, sure as you're born, you're going to die at some point. Trauma, I think they dealt with it the best way they could with the resources they had. I mean, I think my mom, like, one time I had an experience in life where one of my friends drowned, and making sure that going to get counseling, that was a thing that they suggested you do. Like, don't just try to harbor the stuff in. If you need counseling, go get it. Also, it's okay for you to cry if you need to. Not you won't be a crybaby and be weak, but you also need to let some stuff out. And I think one of the best things about growing up where I grew up, and I think, as I get older, I'm really starting to reflect on this. Land is a very important part of healing and a connection to land. There's something therapeutic about being on land. Particularly, I feel like being on land that, like, my ancestors been enslaved on. While that was a very horrific, and I'm not belittling that experience, but to have a deeper connection to the land in which they was enslaved on is very, I think, powerful and liberating to kind of see where you are currently. And like you, I mean, when I first met you and knowing that you had a connection to Mounds by You, that just like blew my mind, because I like, just to have a connection to a place like Mounds by You, it just like, you can't even imagine. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine what people did to build that town. But going back to my point is, like, land is very therapeutic. And so when I get into a funk, like, I try my hardest to go back to South Carolina as much as possible. I haven't been home in 7 months, and my body is yearning for me to go back to that place. And so, because there's therapy in that, but I'm looking at going to see a real therapist too, just for dealing with life.
Got you. So
and if you want me to expound on that.
No, I do. We'll do it one at a time, because you hit a bunch of really good topics that I definitely want to get into. So you talk about land being therapeutic. You talk about, you know, going to see a counselor, and you also talk about, you know, the richness of being a pit master and how that enables you to, you know, connect to, like, your heritage, right? And so with that being said, you know, I want this episode to talk about generational trauma, going from slavery to even what we have going on now. So I'm just going to open up the floor and we just dive into it. You know, just start.
Okay. So one, I think, like, the trauma that we have dealt with as an African-American people since slavery, we haven't had any source of real healing. And in this day and time, we got to go beyond just the Bible or religion for our healing. We need to really, we have the resources and means. We need to go with counseling. We need to go seek out professional counseling to deal with the heaviness of dealing in white supremacy, living in America, the colonialization. It's mind blowing. And how it became mind blowing for me, Greg, in this moment in time, I was listening to an interview, and one of my friends was up there doing an interview, and he was talking, just black male about our age, and he was talking to a white man. And it was on IG Live, and I commented to him, because he used the description of, like, uncle in the 1950s and 60s was a sign of, like, disrespect. And that's how they addressed older black people when they couldn't give them the titles Mr. and Mrs. And during that same vein, I said, why in 2020 do white people have the problems of calling me Dr. Conyers. And he reluctantly said, his name was John T. Edge from the Southern Food Alliance. He reluctantly said, like, they feel threatened. And my point is, and when I heard that statement, I say, like, in this moment, you're threatened because I got an education, but then you're threatened by the fact that I'm a black man who walking down the street, you're threatened. So, like, you can't win for losing. And in that moment, after that conversation, I said, man, we have to deal with so much with being black in America that we need to go seek therapy to keep our sanity, to keep our peace, keep our joy. Because that was one of my things my grandfather always passed down to my family, just like, don't let nobody ever take your joy. And I think, like, food, in particular, food and music is like one of those things with, like, therapeutic for people, but it's also a form of, like, passive resistance, trying to make the best of a situation in a very tough time. And so when you think about, like, American culture, a lot of stuff that was brought out in American culture, I'm going all over the place, but, like, the culture that was birthed by enslaved Africans came through our very horrendous times. I don't know if those cultures, the food and music would have came out without the level of torture. I'm not saying that we need to go back to the torture to create those experiences again, but I think they found peace and comfort in those moments and in the activities associated with it. So I fundamentally believe, like, we need to go get counseling. I got my first counseling session, and not because, just like people get marital counseling, we need to get counseling for this trauma of 400 years, because it's definitely is embedded in our DNA. So, and the reason I know it's embedded in our DNA, they talk about the Holocaust victims and how their DNA changes. Nobody talks about how our DNA changes for going through the Middle Passage through American slavery.
Man, so you hit on, like, some really good points. The trauma that we go through, you kind of lay out, like, this layered onion of what African Americans have dealt with. And so, you know, this podcast is not about a Black Lives Matter movement or anything like that. Even though, you know, I do support the fact that every race needs to be treated equally, and that people need to see that not only Black lives, but, like, there are minority groups that aren't treated fairly throughout this system in America. And so, you know, I'm definitely for the whole movement of reform and police brutality. I'm also, you know, pushing for an end to racism, and, you know, and so that's kind of like how I'm going to shape this next question, right? So when dealing with generational trauma, which is, you know, the form of racism on both sides, like, what are some of the experiences, some of the signs that people are dealing with it?
I don't know if we know what the signs of what we're dealing with, honestly. But what I realize, I think what we do deal with in signs is we perpetuate certain things. We got to work 2 to 3 times harder to get an equal shot, or even just to be seen on the playing field. And in that, you put in your body or mind through so much stress and trauma to be seen as an equivalent. I mean, I think another way how we show our signs of grief, I mean, we definitely show it during like the funeral traditions, but that's just I mean, I don't know if we really know how we show our signs. It's just such that's a tough question, Greg. You kind of got me on that one. I don't even know if we know how to show our grief and trauma.
No, that's good. Okay, so
because it's just,
you brought up a good point and it's more so in the sense of like it's a surrounding type thing, not necessarily a individual like expression or experience that one has. And I'm glad you brought it up, you know, in the sense that you did. So for all of y'all that are out there listening, one of our greatest connections that we have is Howard put me onto this book called The Half That Was Never Told. And it basically breaks down the how and the why about slavery, how it grew, and how it also ended. And in this book, you know, it hits on some very valuable points in which touch on, you know, generational trauma. So, you know, I kind of want to get into that aspect of the book when it comes to understanding what our ancestors went through during these slavery periods and how it has transformed into what we have going on today.
okay, I think I'm gonna give a story on this one, Greg. I think I got a good. I still don't know how to fully unpack it yet, but in this book, there's this part about the whip being the most technological device ever made, and our enslaved ancestors had to deprogram them. Most people are generally left or right hand dominant, but I'm gonna bring it home. Generally, but during those times, they had to program themselves to be ambidextrous to increase their hand making skill, their ability to pick cotton. So one hand is not more dominant than another. And so therefore they was able to pick the most amount of cotton once they programmed themselves to be ambidextrous. But then I heard my mother say something about something her mother said to her about, and I think because my mom was right-handed, and my grandmother like, you're not gonna pick up this object with your left hand. And so I wasn't able to fully unpack what that meant because my grandmother is dead and my mom didn't even really think about it. But I wonder, was that a relic of you're normally supposed to be one hand dominant, not both hands being equally functional and have an equal capacity? And so I wondered, is that a form of trauma that my grandmother wanted to make sure she broke that cycle?
Yeah. And so just to give everybody a context of what he's talking about, it's a section in the book where they dig down into, you know, a story of a slave coming brand new into a plantation from the Virginia, Maryland area down into the South. And so the slave is new, his first day on the cotton field, and he's indoctrinated into the process. And so everybody's lined up, they have the line, and they're having to pick cotton. And so based on how much cotton you pick, that is your average, that is your threshold. So if your threshold is 200 pounds of cotton a day, your expectation is to pick that much. And if you don't, whatever the difference between what you actually picked versus what you were expected to pick, that meant you had that many lashes to take for not producing that much. So in order for a slave to, you know, not take lashes, they became ambidextrous and learned how to move their body in such a way where they were efficient in what they were doing to be able to hit those objectives. And so, you know, that's basically what, you know, what Howard was talking about, and how we had to initially train ourselves in the skills, you know, to be able to not get a beating, you know what I'm saying, for that day. And it's crazy what you can do when you're pushed beyond your limits. And that's a good thing and also a bad thing. So when we talk about trauma and grief, and when we talk about survival technique and coping mechanisms and skills, that was one of the things that was inherently instilled in us, right? Those survival tactics and techniques. And so you bring out a very good point in all of this. And I appreciate you, for bringing that up, because, man, it's a lot. Like when I read that book, and I appreciate you recommending it for me, it just made so much sense.
I'm glad you read it, man. But you actually explained that thing beautifully, saying it's a matter of efficiency. And from a science standpoint, like your body, you breaking down neural channels in your brain, that is crazy. But just sheer survival, that's crazy. I don't know if people understand what it means. I mean, I would love to hear a neuroscience. One day I'm gonna call one of my friends who may be a neuroscientist and ask them, like, how can their brain deprogram itself to be able to do physical tasks more efficiently?
Yeah. And so let's talk about so I know in the history books, right, when we go to school, they teach us that slavery was abolished because it was the right thing to do. But when you read through the book, it's an underlining tone that says that slavery ended because of the economy and technology was pivoting the market in a new direction. And so I kind of just want to get, your take on that aspect of it.
Okay. That's a great point. So slavery ended, quote unquote, for the law, people say the Emancipation Proclamation. But what really drove slavery to end and get people out of those cotton fields was the technology. And what I'm gonna say about technology, one particular device really got a lot of Black folks out of cotton fields, especially if the landowners could afford that particular device. And I think in the Mississippi Delta, they invented capitalism. The function of capitalism is always to make more profit and to try to reduce the amount of human labor. And so they invented the cotton picker. The cotton picker was invented I think they perfected it in about the 1930s and 40s. I can't remember where it was in Mississippi. But that particular invention of that device is what got more Black people out of the fields when the people who own the land actually didn't actually law the land. And so technology was an undercurrent. And if you think about that today in modern times, capitalism is driving a profit. When you think about automation and robotics doing jobs that humans used to do, it's because they're trying to drive a profit. If you can replace human labor, then you can make more profit. It's more dependable. You don't have people who's tired on the job. You don't have people who breaking down. You don't have people who you got to pay healthcare benefits from. At some point, you don't need those same hands. And so similar to when slavery ended and sharecropping, the number of people you had in the fields picking cotton by hand was reduced a lot by the cotton picker. And it's no different than what you see in 2020 with artificial intelligence, AI, robotics, and autonomous operations. And it basically replacing human labor. Or when you go into Walmart and you don't see a cashier there anymore. One time cashiers were all over the place, but you go into Walmart, you go to the bank, and you don't have any interaction. There's new jobs forming, but there are also a lot of old jobs that may not require as much, I guess you say, knowledge, and those jobs, they go away.
Yeah. So when it comes to, technology and like the economy driving, change, there's a point in the book where the author discusses, and and it's even a debate during that time, where even if we didn't have the Civil War, just the shift in the economy and technology over the years would eventually ended slavery. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, I agree, because I mean, the Civil War, and as you read this book, they talk about how the different policies or political decisions were that to keep slavery going or keep capitalism going, you needed new land to develop. So when the land that was in South Carolina, for instance, or Virginia was pretty much diminished from years and years of heavy agricultural use, you take the same thing and you go to like the Mississippi Delta region. And therefore, when you develop a new land, you needed more people. So you keep the things going. But at that time, they didn't have the technology per se to actually harvest. They had the technology to start processing it and for the cotton gin, but the actually picking of it, you needed more human labor. And so over time, you're forced with technology is going to end something. Technology will. Technology and capitalism will do a lot of things, and a war is not going to stop it. Really, technology and capitalism actually, a war. And I'm going to say this: a war may not impact it. The implication, it may speed up certain things, but how capitalism works, it's fuel upon how much profit you can squeeze out of certain things. So when capitalism realizes that it want to end racism because they can drive more money out of it, then racism will end ultimately. Desegregation is really a form of capitalism trying to get money out of the Black community. If you think about how when desegregation occurred after like Brown versus Board of Education, the Black dollar stopped circulating in the Black community. And that is the reason why. I mean, like, because we're Black people trying to relate to something, but in actuality, we lost certain things, certain principles. But capitalism gained a lot during that time period.
Man, you're bringing up some great topics. So when you
I'm sorry, Greg, I'm not getting off topic, man.
Look, no. We're gonna hit all of these points because I mean, like, this is a conversation that I personally want to have, and like I want people to know and understand, and I also want folks to go and do their homework, because not only when you do your homework about your history, you also do your homework to help yourself as well. There's been a number of times when I've had people on my show and they talk about their trauma and their grief that they experienced, and they couldn't define, they couldn't tell what their body was going through. And it wasn't until they put a definition, a name to their experience that they were able to say, okay, this is trauma, this is grief, this is survivor's remorse, this is PTSD, this is complicated grief. And this is what I'm dealing, this is what I'm feeling and going through. Once they have that definition, then they could put a game plan towards treating it and overcoming it. And so, you know, all of these points that you're talking about and hitting, it's one of those things that, you know, just sparks the creative part of the brain to say, well, look, let me go and research this further because I need to know. And I was just recently listening to a short clip between Candace Owens and a Black panel led by T.I. And I was just like, man, I don't know if Candace really knows her history, the way she speaks about the Republicans and also about the president. And I don't not 45 in no way, shape, form, or fashion, because this is not what that platform is about. But to know your history, right? And where you came from and why things are the way they are. And I just encourage people.
I think you I think you made an excellent point there, Greg. I think black and white people need to know their history. I don't think black people know their history truly as good as they should. I mean, maybe by design, we don't know our history because it was written out of a lot of the textbooks based on different organizations who was controlling the media even in the late 1800s, but in the early 1900s. But black and white people need to know this history and let the history stand upon itself and let the facts speak for themselves. And then let the person who is reviewing the facts, let them form their own opinions. And I think you will get a lot of different thoughts. And I think that's what we're seeing right now is, this is one of my guts of feeling why the protest was going on. This is the first time that, well, my parents went to segregated schools. I went to integrated schools. I fundamentally believe like my classmates in high school didn't know what their black classmates had to go through when they go back home or had to be out in the world and what things they had to deal with. And now they're seeing it for the first time and they're seeing some of the historical evidence being brought to light. And now they're coming to have to reckon with that particular statement. I don't know that's one of my thoughts. I mean, the people, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. So the people who went to segregated schools, they're going to have their own set of thought processes. And if they went to private school after segregation ended, after segregation ended, they still continue those same ideological principles. So the students who went to like integrated schools, they seeing things in a new light now that they're adults and they got to kind of weigh out the facts for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, when you talk about integrated schools, coming from, Mount Bayou, Mississippi, and the neighboring county city, Cleveland, Mississippi, it was just within like the last few years that the courts had to desegregate a school in Mississippi because 90 to 98% of one school was all white and the other one was all black. And so, it just makes me like think of, that big question around, well, before I get to the question, there's been a lot of talks about taking down statues of the Confederate generals and honorable mentions that, that were a part of the war. And so me understanding and studying history and war, I know that the spoils of victory go to the victor. And so they, one, get to rewrite history, and two, get to shape and mold that city or country in the eye of, however they feel. So the question that I have is why hide the history? Why hide the truth about slavery, about what happened during, the Civil War, why we had the state expansions, to the West, and, just the whole nine, even what happened after, slavery ended?
I mean, I think America can't really grapple with the truth. I don't know if and the reason I say that, I don't think America can grapple with the truth of what truly happened, because then you realize that a certain population of people built America on their backs. I mean, literally blood, sweat, and tears with knowledge they brought over from Africa to create economic systems to drive the world's economy. And I think if you don't talk about that truth, then you can't acknowledge that. And so, like, people talk about the knowledge, the first economy that made the United States really push slavery into overdrive was like the rice culture. And you go to Senegal or the Gambia region of West Africa to get enslaved people from those regions because they had that knowledge. Not just the ability to grow it, but they had the knowledge of how to cultivate it. But you create so much wealth using that. And so you never paid these individuals for 300, 400, 350 years, or even everything that's really great about America. I hate to say it. I mean, I'm not saying it because it's the truth. A lot of the great things that people enjoy in America, Black people's hands fundamentally shaped it. The food, the music, the culture, the barbecue, everything. They created the wealth even though they didn't get paid for it. And so while they didn't make the money to have in their bank accounts, they created the money for somebody else's bank accounts. They created the systems for how we buy mortgages, how we have mortgage insurance on houses. Those same mortgage insurance were on people. The same like conveyance practices, how you transfer. Yeah, I'm here. They may not want us to be great, man. We are.
All right, man, look, the internet ain't gonna let us be great today, man. It's not gonna let us be great. Right, we try to tackle a very heavy topic, and this shit go out. So, we're gonna push through regardless. Okay, so just to pick up, we were talking about why hide our history, right? And so for me, I'm a type of person, especially coming from West Point, it's like, and just how I was brought up in my family, wrong is wrong, right is right. And so be who you are and what you say, you're going to be and do. And so if you are racist, then be racist, proclaim it, own your truth, and, like, let it be known, right? So why hide our history if horrendous things were done in order to advance America to be the superpower that it is today?
What it really boils down to, Greg, in short and sweet, is if America presented the facts and the truth of the situation, then the people who were oppressed for over 350 years to 400 years in this country, the credit they would have been given to build a country would have to be lifted up even higher. And the people who have said that they create the country, the leaders, the generals, the different presidents, you would say, well, Dad, what did they contribute? You will start asking yourself, what did they really contribute? Yeah, you might say the Rockefellers and George Westinghouse and Tesla invented the electrical system, or Dale Carnegie invented the steel system. But where did that money come from that helped fund those particular wealthy individuals? Where was like J.P. Morgan Chase? Like, where did J.P. Morgan Chase get his wealth from? And J.P. Morgan Chase his money would come. If you follow the money came out of the American South. And who was doing the labor in the American South? It was enslaved Africans. And they was creating using agriculture as the foundation to create wealth for a country to fuel all this innovation. And so that's the reason you see those different, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Dale Carnegie, and all those guys, they made great strides, but where their money really lies, where their money really came from, it had to start somewhere. And they don't want to admit to that.
Correct. Yeah. So let's talk about after slavery, that period when
You talking about like Reconstruction?
when slaves were freed and we were allowed to progress. So you have 2 points of it, right? Yeah. So Reconstruction, of course, Emancipation Proclamation freed the slaves. Shortly after, Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed, and the vice president stepped in and tried to reverse or turn a blind eye to everything that Abraham Lincoln had done. And so when you look at what happened during that time frame, leading up from then, let's say to Black Wall Street, so you take Mount Bayou, Mississippi, which is where I'm from, and you had 2 paths that you can go, right? All black city, all black, town. We do for ourselves, don't depend on anything, or integration. And so Mount Bayou, Mississippi was or chose to be all black. And from the history that I was told about Mount Bayou was that, once Montgomery cleared the town or cleared the swamp and made it into a town, he marched through the South and to the North to, traveled to Washington, D.C. to get the town officially recognized. And it was one of the first official Black towns in the United States. Now, from what I was told during that time frame, Mount Bayou, Mississippi used to be a booming area for cotton.
Okay.
Even if it was Black farmers that farmed, picked, and did for ourselves, it was known around the world as some of the best cotton that, the industry could produce. And so one of the things that I know about war is that if you cut the head of the snake off, right, the rest of the body will die. And that's talking about logistics. So when it came to logistics, the expansion of the railroad, and how we had different political leaders that basically diverted around Mount Bayou, Mississippi, and left it to suffocate. And so now that town is just at a state of, I'm just trying to survive. And it's the same similarity that I've seen with Haiti. Haiti was one of the areas that freed themselves, right? That won their rebellion and won their freedom. And so because they didn't play by the transatlantic slave rules, they were bypassed logistics standpoint, right, from becoming an economic power or even contributor to, to the economy. And so they're left in shambles. And so, I just kind of want to talk about.
But I think you need to speak on that logistics word just a minute, because you might know it better than me, but hey, yes, my understanding of Mount Bayou, it was thriving.
But we were still cut off
from a logistics standpoint. When they decided to remove the railroad stop, that kills Mount Bayou. Slowly but surely.
Mm-hmm. Completely.
Wow.
I mean, it shut it down to a screeching halt. To this day, there's not even a stoplight in the town of Mount Bayou. And they went from well water to city water. And so, when you look at how slavery ended, and when you look at how political leaders in certain positions that were racist, but hid their agenda, right? And policies that were in place, it's a small trend that you tend to see where, like Mount Bayou in Haiti, where African Americans get left out of that pursuit of happiness, that progress that the rest of America, got to enjoy. And so the part that I want to talk about is hiding racism. And so there was a recent Navy admiral that mistakenly hit Facebook Live and posted something about some harsh racial words towards, certain people, which, identified him as a racist. And so I want to get, your opinion or understanding.
So, I mean,
we have
like, hidden racism is very, like, it hurts the economy, first of all. Like,
if they have racist views or
I'd rather
agenda,
personally see people with the Confederate flag up in their yards, in houses, in their businesses, because at least I know I could form an opinion on you based on that belief. When you hide that Confederate flag, I don't really know who you are right off the bat. And I shouldn't have to form stereotype, but I figure like you form stereotypes on me because I'm a black person. I should be ready to form a stereotype of you because you have a Confederate flag up and it represents the signs of a loser. But when you look at it from an economy and you have an agenda, at some point, your racism gonna lose out to major corporations. Like corporations, major capitalism doesn't care about race. I hate to say it. I mean, they think about race, but they don't think about it like little small business players. Capitalism corporations thinks about how much green they could bring into the equation. And whatever it takes to generate green, that's what they're going after. And whoever they got to get the green from, whether it's black, white, green, orange, rich, poor, that's where they're going to get it from. However they can extract that level of resource to get a return to their stockholders. And so hidden racism, they really put a hole on the economy and they stifle growth. And it's well proven just in data, a diverse team can be much more profitable than a team that looks all one way. They say America's GDP could increase a lot if all people have a seat at the table. I think they said 3 or 4 times the GDP. But if you stifle if racism stifles growth, then the GDP not going to increase.
Yeah. So we talked about hiding racism. We talked about hiding our history.
Let me speak about after slavery
things that have happened
for a minute, because I think we don't oftentimes talk about the strides that black people made after slavery during the period called Reconstruction. Reconstruction, black people made so many strides. They was getting in the political offices, such as the Senate, the House. They was owning land, and for say states to say today, like in South Carolina, when South Carolina had Tim Scott become a senator, and when you say the last black senator came during Reconstruction, because they put so much fear and terror on black people that they couldn't even get into those type seats anymore, that's something to be said. Is that right? No, the unjust will never prosper. And so there was a period of time where black people was thriving, but terror and racism really took a hindrance, and whatever they had to do to make sure they could bring black people down, they did that. To go to Wall Street, Black Wall Street in Tulsa in particular, that land was more of a quote unquote castaway land. I guarantee you, if the powers that be knew that Oklahoma, when blacks went out there and started forming that part of the city, they knew it was oil rich. They would not have given that land away. I could promise you that. It was more of an accidental fluke that that black people ended up with that land. But if white people who were in charge knew that Tulsa was oil rich, Oklahoma was oil rich, they wouldn't have given that land. And there's a story, I can't remember the story exactly. I think there was a 12-year-old girl who owned a lot of, somehow or another she inherited a lot of land that had oil and became very valuable. And she didn't know it initially, but then everybody was trying to, I guess, I can't remember if they tried to marry her or whatever, but they wanted to try to take the land because the wealth associated with it. But once they realized black people were getting so wealthy and independent financially and making strides, the only way they knew to stifle that was to bomb it. And you see constant examples of across American history. Every time a black community start thriving, somehow or another they try to tear it down, whether it's a bombing in Tulsa or the massacre, or if you look at, like, I live in New Orleans, and the Claiborne Bridge, the I-10, that was a thriving black community in New Orleans. And what they said, we need to have, for the greater good of the country or for the community, we need to put up a railroad. I mean, we need to put up a highway. Why couldn't they put up a highway in another neighborhood? And you see them putting bridges or highways in black neighborhoods throughout the country. They did it in Durham, North Carolina. It's countless places where once black people start to make strides as a community in separate communities, they try to break them. They break them up. They don't try. They break them up.
Yeah. No, I like how you frame that in the sense that, um, there are some legit paintings on the higher level that make it even more difficult for minorities to advance in life. And I think those hurdles that are directly in place um, are intentional, right? But also like part of the loophole, which needs to be closed. And so what I
Man,
want to talk about
you
right
try to tax
now,
me for everything I
let's get
know almost,
into,
Greg.
because
I
we
read a
talk
book
about labor, we
called,
talk about the
I'm trying to think,
economy,
what's the
let's
name of
talk
this
about
book?
like gentrification
The
and
Color
redlining.
Line, I believe, and they talk
School
about
us
like
on that.
redlining and like lending practices. And what is interesting about those lending practices in like in black urban areas, oftentimes like black people was charged a higher interest rate on houses. They paid more. And then you look at those same areas where redlining occurred in the past. Today, those same communities in various cities across the country are the same ones going gentrification because they're close to downtown. They're close to the city cores. Now people don't want to don't want to drive cars to work, so now they want to ride bikes. And so they get a lot of conveniences of being close to the focal points, but then a lot of times these families have been owning houses for years to get these houses, and then all of a sudden they start doing things to take these houses back because of the proximity, because of the property values, because of when you go gentrification, you start redeveloping and you start using different policy techniques such as like opportunity zones. Like opportunity zones don't generally always occur in the rich white neighborhoods. They always occur in the black neighborhoods, or new market tax credits. They form in, not new market tax, when you do historic tax credits. A lot of the historic tax credits they use in some of these impoverished neighborhoods, they're tied to African-American historical sites. And the people who generally do the redevelopment are not African-Americans. They're white people or other people outside, non-black, I'm gonna say they're non-black people, not just white people, non-black people who are going to develop these projects and properties.
Got you. And so, and this is a question from, you know, an economic standpoint, right? So if a white person comes in and buys up,
technically it's called gentrification. If you look at the word gentrification in and of itself,
and sell them at a
gentrification is about an economic thing.
Gentrification. What is it if a black person comes in and does
but it's seen differently when a black person does it to their own neighborhood. But in the essence of the word, it's gentrification. I mean, but I believe black people need to invest in their communities, their neighborhoods, and they need to hold on what they got and make those. Don't let other people redevelop your neighborhoods. If anybody should generate wealth off your communities and off your neighborhoods, it should be black people.
Should be I definitely agree with that. So when we go from gentrification to redlining.
So redlining also, I didn't talk about the lending practices associated with redlining, but
what it was back then.
The like lending requirements back then where redlining occurred, those are direct correlations to where gentrification occurs today. The reason it affects us today is because partly is in some of those neighborhoods where redlining occurred, if the families were able to own those homes outright or be able to buy it at a fair price and not have to pay more money, then those families could start creating generational wealth back then. But because they were not able to, they do not benefit from just something simple as the time value of interest. Because if you had $100 in your bank account from 1950s, and you compare, and you just go with the natural interest rate of say 5%, you get a certain amount. But if you start with $100 in your bank account from 1975, and you get the same 5% interest, there's no way that you could ever catch up with that investment from 1950. And that is why there's why the wealth disparity is keep getting bigger and bigger, because you can't time is a thing that you can't make up. You could grow wealth exponentially in certain sectors, but you can't overcome the lost value of time. And time is the one common equalizer among all people, whether you're rich or poor. But how fast, how much work, and how much productivity you can create in a given amount of time, it changes based on how much resources you have.
Mm-hmm. That's a good explanation of it. That is. So you spoke on. I'm gonna hit on two topics, right? And one is it's touchy. The other one, of course, applies for everyone. And so the first topic that I want to hit on is interracial relationships. Now, I have my views about it from a standpoint, and well, there's three views, right? For a person that's in an interracial relationship.
Okay, I think you got to look at this thing twofold. I think you got to look at it. This is a very layered question, but I think you got to look at it.
A specific minority.
The dynamics of the interracial relationship, and the reason I'm gonna bring this question up, I'm gonna bring it up from this point of view. If the woman is black and the man is white or non-black, that's one interracial relationship. But then if you bring up the man is black and the woman is white, then that's a different interracial relationship. And I'm gonna bring it from a cultural viewpoint, first and foremost. Culture generally goes with the woman. The woman birthed the culture. Like black women birth culture. White woman can't birth black culture. No matter what, and even if she try to teach them black culture, it's just not the same. And a man can't really teach culture so much like a woman can. And I think like I can't prove it scientifically, but I believe there's a difference in you just can't just loosely say interracial relationships. Both of them have different implications. And then when you have people fighting for a cause, you somewhat lose. Well, I'm gonna say it like this, and I'm gonna bring it even further home than this. As a black man, if I don't marry a black woman, do I really love my mother? Was my mother not good enough for me? And some people may say love is blind or whatever, but like, love can be colorblind, but there's something to be said about that.
Right. No, I'm with you in that sense. When I look back at slavery and see how we were considered property and not human, right? Nor had the rights to vote as, any other human would. The frustration when it came to, and this is all throughout, the book as well, how white men viewed slave women, used them for their own pleasures. And so that aspect of interracial relationships frustrates the hell out of me, right? Because I don't like the notion of slave sex, the best put it. But the caveat to it as well, in this day and age and time, I truly believe that interracial relationships
in that sense, I think that is why, like,
for
people, because now you got, say for instance, you got a racist grandparent, the white grandparent, but they got a grandchild who's mixed. They gotta love this. Most of the time, they're gonna love this grandchild despite of, because that's their only seed going forward. They may not be happy about it, but they're gonna love that grandchild for the most part. And that is kind of equilibrium, and that is kind of why like America is having a awakening right now, because the data shows that America is turning brown. It's not turning black, it's turning brown.
Yeah, mixed, that whole thing. And
two different battles.
With that being said, my hat goes off to anyone that's in an interracial relationship right now, because you are fighting against the norm. For a white, it's two different battles, depending on the dynamics of the relationship. For a white woman, she's literally having to give up her white privilege to now protect and defend her family. And for
I kind of make an excuse for a black woman, especially, and this is why I'm gonna make an excuse, and I'm gonna make an exception.
A white man and going against
black women are pretty much the most educated group out here, and if they're looking for their equivalent black males, we're not here in the same numbers with the same professional accomplishments or the same just accomplishments. And so it could be by design, but the reality of it is, if they don't have an equal talent pool to go from, then they kind of got, if they want to find love, it's okay for them to, I don't have a problem with them going interracial. I don't think I see it the same. I just have different issues. I see interracial couples differently but they are front runners on, I guess, bringing to an equilibrium. But it's a very, I mean, that's a very touchy subject, but I think it's very interesting. They definitely having battles within their households and their family reunions, or when they go home for Christmas. I can't envy them. I mean, I have some interracial family members in my household, in my family, and while we accept them as all people, I'm not sure when they go to their white families, are they accepted the same way?
Yeah. And so, I mean, I hope this portion of our conversation has done some justice. And, you know, I just want to put it out there that I don't mean any disrespect to any relationship out there. I just want to have those hard conversations, because when you're dealing with trauma and grief, this is a part of it. This is the part that we don't talk about. This is the part that is unknown. And so for any young person that is thinking about, you know, getting into a relationship with someone,
but let's go back on the trauma on let's go back to a point in history on trauma,
all means, like,
and what it looked like for when a white plantation owner had a baby with the enslaved person. Most of the time, the white wife, the plantation's wife, who was perhaps white, most of the time when they had a child, that enslaved child got sold off really quickly. And that is a level of trauma. Like, why couldn't that family, if you do the crime, why couldn't the family stay together? But you so hate seeing that your husband, I guess, snuck out to the house with the enslaved person, that you don't want to see, I guess you see your husband into that slave child. And that's a very deep trauma scar for family members who trying to identify their roots, especially as today for like Black people, when they're trying to go back and trace their lineage, when you got people like Thomas Jefferson having two different families. Yeah. You got a white family, you got a Black family. Or if you bring it forward to growing in South Carolina, you had Strom Thurmond. Strom Thurmond was a very staunch politician, but he had a Black daughter.
Yeah. And so like you bring up a very great point when you talk about slave families, right? So when a white person is in slavery, when a white owner had sex with a slave and made a child, the easiest thing for them to do was to sell them off, right? To make peace in the family. You know, a bigger notion, because it wasn't just that, or for that reason that families were broken apart. You got to look at like the totality of it. In the book, it also talks about some stats where slave families from Maryland and Virginia, it was somewhere around 92 to 98% of those families were separated and sold off individually. And so there was never a consistent family unit when it came to slavery. I mean, you had 1 in a million in order to get your wife and kids in the same plantation as you. And it was by design that they would do this so that you would stay discombobulated and focused on, your work. And so I remember in this conversation that Candace Owens had with T.I. in that panel, how she talked about, even to this day, where Black men are not prevalent in the home. And so I don't think she knew, or maybe she did, but by design, from the beginning, Black men were never prevalent to stay in the home. And so I think that has hurt, our culture as one, as well as it also helped us to survive. So there's a point in the story, and I hope you guys go out and get this book after you listen to it. It's fucking amazing, right? There's a point in the story where they talk about this man who was separated from his wife and 2 daughters. And so the wife and 2 daughters got sold separately to another slave plantation. And the father, he was sold to a plantation in the South. And so when he got to that plantation, he took in an orphan boy. And so it asked the question of, at what point did this orphan boy look at this man and call him father, and they became family, to the point where this orphan boy named his 2 daughters after the daughters of the slave who lost his wife and 2 kids. Right, so that in itself is heartbreaking and also powerful. To be a slave and to still have the ideology and the compassion of wanting
the family unit is critical,
and do it for a family unit.
And while I may have personal preferences, like the family unit is paramount. Like today, we got a foster care system.
From what you love the most.
When I asked my parents about growing up, did they have a foster care system? They said that was non-existent. Like if somebody couldn't take care of their kids, more than likely a sister or brother or aunt took those people in. At least with Black people, white people might have had a foster care system, but I know Black people didn't have social services. And because they were so, I guess just coming out of slavery, like you're not gonna want to lose any parts of your family for not, because you can't take care of them. They just want a mouth to feed in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. Man. Okay, so to get back on like the topic of dealing with trauma and PTSD, and of course, we talk about generational trauma. Let's get into police brutality. And so there has been a widespread push for police reform, especially when it comes to the Black community versus any other. And so before you comment, I had a conversation with a guy on social media, and he was like, why aren't you guys protesting about white police brutality versus Black police brutality? Because just by the sheer number of things and population size, there have been more white police brutality, and then there is Black police brutality is second, just by the numbers. But what the guy didn't know or didn't explain was that a Black person is 2.5 more times likely to experience police brutality than any other race.
I think I'm gonna say from personal experience,
And so I just
with
kind
police
of want
brutality,
to talk about that
when you
aspect
get
of it,
profiled by
while
a
we're
Black
going through what we're
policeman
going through as a nation.
just for driving, and then the same situation happened, and you got profiled by a white policeman, in the same exact truck. For me personally, I almost have to take the whole color of the color of the person out of it. I have to go into the whole badge, the whole uniform. But then when you see the overarching number of, disproportionate number of Black folks dying at the hands of the police department, it just doesn't sit right. And especially when it's blatantly obvious. It's not like it's like concealed and behind closed doors. It's like you could just look at it. I mean, I think the past few ones really got to me. Ahmaud Arbery as well as George Floyd. I mean, every one of them got to me, but like, I think just the form for a law enforcement officer to see like a man as helpless, like George Floyd, like what goes through your mind in that moment? It brings you to tears. I mean, like I didn't even watch that video because I think I did finally watch the video about 4 weeks later after all my friends like, you need to watch this video. But when I first heard about it, I said, I don't want to see it. I don't want you to tag me in it. To me, it's just another Black person being killed, and it was sad. And Ahmaud Arbery was sad because it should have took 3 months to tell us what's going on. And as I start running, I start asking myself, Greg, during the midst of COVID, is it safer for me to run with my dog than to run by myself? Because people see humanity in my dog. As me as an individual. And it's well proven that America sees dogs or Harambe the gorilla more than they see a Black man. Like Michael Vick, for example, this dude, he went to jail, he lost his contract. Then here recently, I think last summer, he tried to go do a camp somewhere, a summer camp. And they didn't want Michael Vick to talk to young kids because of what he did with dogs. And not to say like you shouldn't be cruel to dogs. You shouldn't be cruel to any animals. But as a Black person, I feel like a dog life is more valuable than a human life. And there's just so many cases of that.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I mean, the guy that was on the page, and I left all of his comments and stuff up because, I posted something that Barack Obama had posted, and it had nothing to do with necessarily Black Lives Matters, but it was more so around just police reform. And he wanted to go off on this tangent of
I wish like this whole police reform, like I do believe you need to have some police. You need to have justice. It's not like people talking about disbanding the police department. That's crazy.
Aspect of it,
because some people, Black and white, need to go sit behind the bars and rotten for some heinous crimes they do. But when I think about reform, I think about like the amount of money that's spent. How you decide how many jail houses you build is based on the educational system, or like what students test at a certain grade level, and that's how you size the number of beds. That tells me we're putting the money in the wrong places. So I feel like we need to put more of that money from the police department or the law enforcement sector into the educational system. I would love to see that in the reform movement. I would love to see the mental health, the therapy, and that kind of social services getting the funding that the police department is getting to treat this stuff on the front end. Some of that budget item. just so people get the mental health that the help they need. But education, in my mind, is the biggest police reform that you could ever do. But I don't think America really want to do that kind of police reform.
Yeah. Okay. So to just kind of like ring it in, because you spoke earlier and you said that.
So I believe all black people.
All black people.
I do. All black people need to seek help, and I think like all black people need to seek help in the South, especially black people who was enslaved in the South. Not people who come over from Africa. I'm talking about families who've been over here, like been through enslavement. I think they need to seek therapy, and they need to seek therapy in their community. But I think they also need a land source, a land base to root themselves in, that they have a sense of pride in again. And I believe that therapy, it needs to be professional, but I think they also need to have homes and safe havens or places where they could come in the South, whether it's Mounds Bayou, whether it's like Clarendon County, where I'm doing this project called the Acre Project. I believe you need to have those retreat spaces in the same places where very harsh times have occurred, but show you the possibility of what you can do if you really understand and educate yourself, and also like look at if these people accomplished this in the late 1800s, right after slavery, without the education and the formal training we have, and we can't do any better than what they can, then we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing wrong? But I do believe we need to do some therapy, and we need to seek it out, because we shouldn't be harboring, our life expectancy shouldn't be 10 years shorter based on because of our color of our skin. And I think we don't know how to unpack and compartmentalize things that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So with that being said, part of what we're doing.
I believe so, but the other question I asked my therapist is, the first question I asked my therapist, do my therapist see a therapist?
The same things you've been through, then the treatment will have greater satisfaction.
And the reason, my brother, when I approached this conversation, I asked my brother, like, man, I think about going to see a therapist. And he said, well, somebody told him, your therapist needs to see a therapist because your therapist is receiving a lot of information. And if they don't have ways to cope and how to I can't think of the word right now, contextualize or compartmentalize the stuff that they're receiving, then it's become very unhealthy to them too. You put an extra burden on them. And so that was the very first question I asked my therapist.
Yeah. No, that definitely makes sense. Because I've had some therapists that I've even sat in and was like, you might need a little more help than I do. You listen. So, I just bring this out because when a person is seeking help, unless you're in a dire need, and I've known people that have been in a dire need and they just need to talk to someone, and that makes complete sense. If you have the opportunity to pick your therapist and pick, the type of person that you want to talk to, by all means, like you have the freedom to do that. It's not just you either have this person or it's nothing. You have the opportunity, or the choice to pick your therapist. And so if you want someone that is culturally sensitive to your needs, then by all means, do that. So I appreciate you, sharing that aspect, and definitely ask that question of, is my therapist seeing the therapist? Because, you want someone that is grounded and connected as well, because we all need help. We're all dealing with, our own battles on a daily basis. And so it's a community effort to help each other. And it's not just one person that's out there. And so, I appreciate you coming on and speaking.
If I could give my younger self any piece of advice, I think I would tell my younger self is go see the world. Would you give your younger self? Like, while you're young, go see other places so you can kind of get a different perspective of America. And also try to learn a foreign language, because I realize that as an American, most Americans only know one languages. But when you go to other countries, people in other countries know 2, 3, 4 languages. And I don't know if we are global citizens in that regard. So that's always been my fundamental thing. Like, I don't travel much, but I think, like, if I had to tell my young self, like, do a study abroad, go immerse yourself in some other culture, and just see America from a different viewpoint.
Yeah. Okay.
The two major efforts I'm working on these days, Greg, is I'm really trying to make sure I understand the 400 years of American barbecue, and I think I'm getting pretty close of that, deciphering pit cook barbecue and its origins in the American South. And I'm working on a coffee table book for that. And the other project that I'm really excited about these days is called the Acre Project. And the 100 Acres Project to me is my attempt to attain 100 acres of farmland and in the agricultural South End, Clarendon County, where I'm from, and own the land and be able to create an incubator to process whatever is grown on that land to help create an economy to help serve the bigger community. And I'm doing it on an incubator scale because I want to start small. Not because I want to start small because it gives me the opportunity for more success if I prove the model out right without having a whole bunch of risk. But then, like, for me, like, when I have this 100 acres, barbecue is very important to me, and bringing people together. I want to better create an event called Gumbo Jubilee where I give recognition to people in the foodways, from farmer to table, to recognize contributions of African Americans primarily, but I am going to also center like a non-Black person, primarily white, one person, because we always had white people in the trenches with us. We can't always say we was in these trenches by ourselves, but we had advocates on the other side of the table. And so I want to make sure they get recognized, but I want to create something like barbecue is a thing to me, I believe, bring all people together. People always celebrate barbecue and have a good time around barbecue and fellowship. And so I want to have the barbecue festival kind of like the Coachella and make it one of the biggest barbecue events in the country. And we're gonna do something in Miles Bayou too. We gonna figure out this. I ain't forgot about Miles Bayou. Hey, I haven't forgot about it. It may not happen this year just because of COVID, but
well, look,
I definitely haven't forgot about it. No doubt.
Indeed.
I would say don't give up on 2020. 2020, every day that we're here, it's a blessing. And we should try to make the best of our time here.
Well, look,
so a lot of people not here to say that.
Of encouragement or words of wisdom.
Peace.
All right. Well, look, everyone, this is Howard Conyers and Greg Washington with Guards Down, telling all y'all out there to be safe, stay focused, and stay engaged. We're out.